So if I can have a motion to accept tonight's agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So now we'll start with our district updates. Dr. Harrison?
Yes, good evening, everyone, and I apologize for my absence at the last meeting. Like some others, was certainly under the weather. This evening, we start off with lots of exciting news related to student acknowledgement and student accomplishment. Students that I think will be parading through this room in coming months to be recognized for their achievements. First, I want to acknowledge 3 students who have been named National Merit Finalists and are among now 15,000 students in the nation that are competing for additional scholarships. And that would be Rishit Gupta, Adriana Palmieri, and Aiden Sullivan. So we're certainly very, very proud of them and all of their accomplishment, and we wish them luck as they move through the process. I'm also very proud to share that sophomore Brooke Danevsky has won MIT's 2020 Think competition for her paper and project entitled A Self-Adaptive Device that utilizes neuroplasticity for rehabilitation of stroke victims. So just the title in itself is impressive, isn't it? She was one of only 6 national winners and will receive up to $1,000 to fund the development of her actual device. She actually headed to MIT to present her project and will be meeting with professors there to be able to discuss her work. If you want to check out information on her project, you can head to the think.mit.edu website, and you'll see her picture there and a whole description of her work. So we're really, really proud of what Brooke has achieved here. Following the theme of science, recently we had some more wonderful accomplishments come out of our science research program, which it seems like every time we turn around, our students are earning recognition for their work in the program. So just a week ago, the Junior Science Humanities Symposium was held at John Jay High School in Cross River. 20 of our students from the science research program presented their work by either poster presentation or PowerPoint. And we had a number of winners. We had Alex Savino won 3rd place in the engineering physical science category for his poster presentation. Max Edelman won 2nd place in computer science, and Rishit Gupta won 2nd place in computer science in a biomath category. In the speaking presentations, we also had Aiden Malone, who won 3rd place in the behavior category, and he advanced to Albany for a statewide competition in March. Zachary Mizraka won 2nd place in the engineering, technology, computer science category and is also advanced to Albany. And Zoe Jacobs won 1st place in medical science category and is headed to Albany. So congratulations to all of those students. Tonight we have our first discussion related to the proposed calendar for the 2021 school year. And I thought it was apropos to share some of the work that has been occurring in our PLRDs. We've had some real targeted work that is clearly linked to our strategic objectives and strategic plan, and focusing on diversity and acceptance and creating welcoming school communities. Last week, the Dow's Lane staff participated in a workshop about creating inclusive communities that was led by GLSEN. Main Street had another workshop by Welcoming Schools, which is a program affiliated with the National Human Rights Foundation. And there was also a parent program last Wednesday night at Main Street, and hopefully some of you folks got to be able to check that out. And the feedback that we received on that was very, very positive. Then we had some training that took place actually here in this room for the middle school staff related to diversity and implicit bias that was facilitated by the NYU Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity in the Transformation of Schools, which was really an incredible workshop and had staff thinking. Today we actually had a debrief call with the Metro Center, and they were blown away by the level of engagement and the work that came out of it from our faculty And then IHS hosted Dr. Paula Fico with the support of the PTSA. She served on a panel, we may remember earlier in the year, that was at the IASC event on drugs and alcohol use, and she led a program for our faculty and staff on issues related to stress and anxiety in our students' lives. So that's all some great work and all things that we're going to continue to build upon. Similarly, and linked to all this, right after break, we're looking forward to host CASTLE, which is a collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning, for a visit here in Irvington. We've invited CASTLE to come and join us, as the board will remember from previous resolution, that they're going to come and spend a full day in the school district. They're going to meet with student groups, teacher groups, administrators, parents, and trustees, and to get a sense of our SEL programming in the school district. They're going to observe classrooms. They're going to tour our facilities. They've been reviewing piles of data and information related to our programming over the last couple months. And then following that, they're going to turn around a report about what they observed and propose some recommendations for the school district for us to develop a well-articulated, well-aligned SEL program in the district. So we look forward to that. Typically, the reports take 6 to 8 weeks to develop, but we've asked, since this visit has been rescheduled because it was originally planned for one of the days when we either had an early release or a delayed opening for snow. We've asked them to expedite it, so they're going to try to do it much sooner for us so we can kick off our work sooner. Also, I just want to give a little plug that there's still an opportunity to register for the next coffee that I'll be hosting on March 3rd. If you haven't registered already, you can check out a link from this week's newsletter or last week's newsletter. It'll be held the 3rd at 10:15 at the Black Cat. We are also rescheduling our roundtable that was to be held on the 28th, when many of us, including moi, was quite ill. And we're going to hold that at the 28th here in this room. I'm sorry, the 28th, 25th. I just heard myself say that, the 25th. We will begin at 7 p.m. rather than 7:30. Really important topics of conversation. First, the board and the administration is going to delve into instructional resources, how they've evolved in education, what we're utilizing in our schools, and use that dialogue to help inform revisions to our textbook adoption policy. So it's going to be a real authentic process with engagement between the board and the administration, and we look forward to actually Mary leading a workshop for all of us that evening. Following that, we will have a presentation and discussion related to social work services and the needs that we've been speaking of that are present here in the school district. Carol, do you have something you want to speak to?
Sure. We'll be putting in, just updating the board, we'll be putting in a new phone system in next week while we're on break. It's actually part one of the phone system, so we'll be focusing on the offices, and then we'll be doing the classrooms. And so for a while, we're actually going to have a hybrid system with 2 different phone systems going on, but it's the way you kind of have to do this, otherwise it would be overwhelming for us. And I would just ask the community to be patient, because I'm sure there's going to be a couple of phone extensions you don't get perfectly correct, and you might have a little trouble reaching somebody. So in that case, call the office, call a office, and they'll direct you to the right place. And also our tree will change, or when you call 591-8500, we're going to update that and make sure that that's correct. We've actually found a couple of, I would call them dead numbers, dead links in that. So we're going to take care of a lot of this while we're doing this. So it's a work in progress, and I do ask for the community's patience when we make the switch.
Great. And thank you. And as the board and community may remember, that was a budgetary initiative that was very important for the school district to take on this year, because we have a very old system that is no longer supported, and frankly, as you may know, the system goes down from time to time, and we're worried that day is going to come when we're not able to bring it back up. So this is very needed and timely. Yes. And Mary, do you want to talk a little bit about the diversity job fair that we participated in last week?
Sure. So last Thursday, we participated with several other districts in a diversity job fair that was hosted by Hastings Middle School. We had a very nice turnout. We were extremely busy interviewing in the beginning of the evening, trickled down a little bit as time went on. We interviewed over 40 candidates, and of that, approximately half of them were identified as good possibilities for the openings that we currently have, and we'll be hoping that those people will apply on OLAS, which they've been asked to do, and we hope to bring them in for interviews. We were really excited. Some of the more challenging positions to fill, we saw candidates that we thought were exciting for those, so we hope that this will be a good move for us in terms of filling our vacancies for next year.
Fantastic.
And you mentioned that the date has moved up on the.
Yeah, so this is the, we now say the third annual. It was originally an effort that we started just with the Quad Villages. This year, Edgemont joined us. And it typically was held about 6 weeks later in the year. And it turns out that Irvington were a little more ambitious than some of our neighbors in starting our hiring processes for the vacancies that we know exist. So when you think of folks that are retiring, for example, whereas new positions that you'd be adding, you'd hold off until to advertise anticipated openings when the board actually adopts a budget. So by moving it up, these 6 weeks has given us an opportunity to really see all these candidates at the front of our interviewing process. And I'd also say that we have a number of vacancies this year because we have so many retirements. So in the last 2 years, we had headed into the job fair with only a couple openings. Now we went in and we had, how many openings would you say that we were, 11? Yeah.
About
10 or 11 positions. So it was really exciting. As Mary said, it was busy. Not only were she and I there, our personnel assistant, Lisa Tortora, was there, but Joyce Chapman came, Andrea Cantor was there, David Sotile, Matt Samuelson, and Stu Hansen. And we were all interviewing candidates, and we had lines and people waiting at other tables. So folks were really interested in what we have to offer, and not only the position, but a lot of folks came in knowing an awful lot about our school district. So it was really exciting.
Okay, great.
So now we'll move on to our committee reports, B and G. Anyone want to talk to where we're at?
Didn't we give a report on that at the last board meeting? Yeah,
Did we?
Yeah.
Okay.
we met on the 28th, and so it's really any meetings that happened after the 28th of January.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, curriculum?
Yeah, you want to do that?
Go ahead.
No? Okay, I'll gladly. We had a very, let me just pull up my notes, if you can, just a second. So we had a very nice meeting. It was on the day of World Read Aloud Day, so it was a more compacted meeting than sometimes normally. We talked about, we welcomed Mary to the district. It was her first curriculum meeting, so welcome again, Mary.
Thank you.
It was very lovely speaking with you. We talked about some of the prior initiatives, including the one-to-one, where we're going to start to head with that, just sort of outlining, as Mary's coming into the district, some of the work that's going to continue and strengthen and wind up towards the end of the year. The biggest update, I think, was around the progress around the district data plan. It was a really rich discussion around where that's headed and how that's going to turn out. That's been on the plate for a minute, so it's really good to see the sort of like, wow, okay, we are. Same with the district PD plan. So we talked about that for a bit. You already referred to the Castle visit. We talked about the Castle visit. I think you summed that pretty good. And you also just discussed the hiring process piece. So I think that pretty much sums up the curriculum meeting, unless you want to add, Brian or Aaron.
I think that covers the highlights.
I just had a question related to that, you know, as part of our budget process, if there are going to be aspects related to implications to our technology plan and our one-to-one, I guess we'll surface
Yes.
that information to the board.
I should have said right before, so when we talked about one-to-one, the early world language, expanding that teacher program, part, an ELA, we talked about how it's going to show up in the budget session, the budget
Okay.
development portion. of
Yeah,
it.
so the board should anticipate, certainly having conversation around three key areas that are really carrying forward from previous budget cycles. So early world language as reference, technology, one-to-one, as well as the social work. So as I referenced at the next meeting on the 25th, we'll have thorough discussion. Board will be getting some materials, hopefully by the end of the week, I think, related to social work. We're also preparing some resources and documents that you'll have well in advance of the meeting on March 3rd to be able to inform some of the thinking and discussion related to early world language and one-to-one.
And that would include some overview of the implementation this year in both of those?
Yes, sir.
Excellent, thank you.
Support by Nora.
Policy?
I guess we're having.
I was the only one, okay, yes, so Jennifer was joining us. Well, we're in the process of going through the 5,000 series, but because a lot of board members were not here, and Dr. Harrison was not here at the last board meeting, we tabled the first read of the 4,000 series. And there were some questions from board members that were shared with us, so the committee went through them, edited anything we needed to in the 4,000 series, and then we're trucking along with 5,000.
And I would say there was some good feedback, and I'm not sure which trustee offered it, related to the field trip policy and the chaperone ratios. So if you look at the attachment on this agenda in contrast to the one last time, we made edits to consider that feedback, and we think it
Thank you,
will
Mr.
cover
Hammond.
those questions.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Being that you trucked on to the 5,000 series, if stuff comes up tonight about the 4,000 series.
No,
are
the
you-
4,000 series is on tonight's agenda as a first read for discussion with the board, and you can ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you go back to it in policy committee if stuff comes up
A
here?
separate agenda item. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I'm-
Do we have, looking at updates, any update from the last IF meeting?
I wasn't able to make the last meeting. I know
Okay.
Chris was able to make.
Dr. Harrison, were you able to?
Yeah,
do
they're busy planning their annual fundraiser, so if you haven't bought your tickets yet, there's still some opportunity to do it. It is just around the corner. The Roaring Twenties theme, and it'll be down at Hudson Loft, which I hear has had lots of improvements and is even greater than it was the last time that they were there. So I know we're all looking forward to attending, so hopefully we'll see a lot of community members there supporting the IF and the great work they do for our students.
Thank you. So now we move to comments from members of the community about topics that appear on the agenda. If you have a comment, you're welcome to go to the microphone and identify yourself. Please be mindful to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Ruoff, 89 Highland Lane. I would like to ask the board to have certain considerations regarding the hiring of the new director of curriculum. I feel it is imperative that this individual has experience developing a successful secondary ELA program. We have put a lot of efforts in developing science and STEM in our district, which is great. I think we also need to be mindful of the importance of ELA and the need in our district to develop this curriculum, especially given the results of the 2017-2018 School Quality Survey question. Do you have any specific recommendations for improving the quality of the educational experience at Irvington? The #1 response was parents say they want improvement in the instruction of the English language arts, particularly when it comes to writing instruction. Interestingly, this question was not asked in the 2018-2019 School Quality Survey. It is important that we use the surveys to inform the decisions we make so we know we are following through on the expressed concerns of the stakeholders, the parents, the community members, and the students. One possible solution to foster writing skills for high school students would be to create a writing lab. This drop-in model has successfully been in place at Briarcliff High School for 21 years. The writing lab offers students the opportunity to sit down one-on-one with English teachers to to receive writing support. The students sign up in advance and can go anytime during the day. The writing lab is voluntary for students to receive help, unlike the 9th grade writing class, which is mandatory, thus limiting the class choice options for 9th graders. So please consider the writing lab option, as well as a new director of curriculum who has proven experience with creating a relevant, engaging secondary level ELA program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eric Oley, and I live in Irvington. I have two boys in high school, and I would like to second Jennifer's ask of the administration. I think the community has clearly spoken that this is the #1 concern. This has been the #1 concern for a long time. Predates, obviously, the 2017-2018 survey. I remember coming and commenting to the school board about the quality of the middle school English program when my son first experienced that, my oldest son first experienced that. And I know that the administration followed up on creating the freshman writing class, probably as a result of the concern of the community. And I wrote a letter earlier in the semester, in September, specifically about that freshman writing program that has been in place since 2014-2015 school year. It was amazing to me to find out at that point that the program had not been assessed and reported to the school board, which I found unbelievable to me. I remember during the process when it was being proposed by the administration in 2014. I believe I went back and looked at the school board meetings that pertain to this issue. I believe it was April 9th, 2014. And there was a lot of concern by two of the members of the school board about this writing program, and one who I think might have even voted against the budget because the budget included money for this writing program. I realized that the majority of the school board voted to install this writing program and approve the money that was budgeted towards that. And then I also looked at the meetings from May 5th, 2015 and May 26th, 2015, when this was discussed again. And I saw an outpouring of community members come, both parents and students, speaking to their passions. And at that point, it was about the Latin program and how the installation of this writing class was affecting enrollment in Latin. And at this point in 2015, the administration was proposing to require health class for 9th graders, which piggybacked to the writing program, which is an every other day class, would actually block out one full period of the school year for 9th graders, which ultimately has an effect on enrollment in Latin class. And these people were very passionate about it, and it was really, really nice to see, because as you guys know better than anyone, there's not a lot of participation in school board meetings. And I always am impressed when people come and speak and tell everyone how they feel, because that's your lifeline to the community. I know it's your lifeline to the community. At the May 26th meeting, there were other people who came in, really articulate, really passionate about the Latin program, but then also speaking now to the writing class. And several people on both occasions talked about targeting the middle school program, the middle school ELA program, as a way to deal with the writing issue in Irvington. I don't know if that ever happened, but that to me was obvious. To me, this writing class was a stopgap method, stopgap class, because the real problem started in middle school, secondary education. So to me, it was obvious at that point. When I found out in September that there had been no assessment that was reported to the school board, I was shocked. I remember being at those meetings and hearing the discussions, the administration, the school board, and the people in the audience, and to a T, all three groups agreed that there had to be an evaluation of the quality of this program. Now, obviously, there are different ways to evaluate, but there was no argument about that. The argument on the May 5th, 2015 meeting was 8 months long enough for the program to be in place to be evaluated by the administration and the school board? And the answer was probably no. 8 months is not long enough. But Raina actually admitted that they could do an evaluation at the end of the year and then every 6 months after that. Now, we had the first graduating class that had the freshman writing program in 2017, 2018. At that point, logically, there should be an assessment of the program, and that should be reported to the Board of Education. I don't understand why that did not happen. When you heard the people in the community voice their passion about this, and the effect that it was going to have on the scheduling of ninth graders, that was not followed through on. I found that incredibly disappointing. Now, I've spent a lot of hours supporting this administration and the school district on various different projects. And to me, and I've actually also supported all of you guys that ran. I bet you that every one of you ran on a platform of transparency. To me, this is an incredible lack of transparency. And what really scares me is that we don't have the curriculum director that installed the program. Raina Kaur left mid-year for some reason. I don't know why. The principal of the school that had tenure left. So now we are losing our institutional memory of why this class was even instituted. And it's just there now. And it's having an effect on the students. And now when we have the master schedule, it's going to possibly be changed. We're possibly going to drop a period that is actually blocking off another period, eliminating another elective for these ninth graders. And they can't start their sequence, their four-year sequence, whether it's in art, Latin, or whatever they want to do. And it's affected my family personally because my son was not able to take Latin this year because he loves playing piano and he was really excited about the opportunity to be in a jazz band. And he also really, really loves art. He could not take Latin because he has this mandatory writing class, the quality of which, anecdotally, I've spoken to a couple dozen of people in the community, and the reviews are mostly negative. Actually, I have not heard a positive review. I'm sure that some people have been affected positively by this class, but most people that I know tell me that they have had a not positive experience or possibly a negative experience in this class. Now, I've heard that from other people that I don't even know. People spoke about it at board meetings. Parents spoke about it on May 26, 2015 meeting. She talked about how her son thought the class was incredibly redundant and was not worthwhile at all. The person who was valedictorian of our school class in 2019 actually joked about the quality of this writing class. And then come September 2019, I find out that there has not been a reporting of the quality and assessment of the quality of this class given to the Board of Education. These are the people that we have voted for to be our voices and our ears in the school community. And I'm just really upset about that, and I'm asked the board to please urge the superintendent to give us an assessment of the quality of this class and prove to us this class is worthwhile to keep in the curriculum. Because everything that I hear says no. Thank you very much.
Hi, Kira Smith. I'm not going to add any more information. I just want to say that I support what Eric and Jennifer said, and I'd really like an evaluation of the freshman writing class. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Tanya Hunt. Just quickly, I would like the board to consider the writing lab as a model for supporting writing. I think it would be a much more effective tool to use to help students with their writing as opposed to a mandatory every other day class. I know in the experience of my two sons, who are now 20 and 17, they found it not to be particularly helpful, and I think when a student needs help with writing, they know they need help, and to be able to sign up for a writing lab would be a more effective tool for most students. Certainly there are students who need help more consistently, but those students are likely students who, would need some kind of academic support outside of a class anyway. The second point I'd like to make is with scheduling concerns, one of the things that has come up over and over in the master schedule meetings, in which I've been involved for the entire time it's been discussed, is that the master schedule, one of the things people value, not just parents but students, is the choice that we offer students. And having more choice would be more possible if, in fact, students could both choose to get writing help when they need, and also choose to take Latin when they would like to. I mean, the example Eric gave, happens to a lot of students. They're forced to choose not to take Latin as an example because they have to take the writing class or they have to take health, and they just don't have enough time in their schedule to take everything they would like to take. Not to say that students don't have to make choices, because they do, but one of the main benefits of Latin and being able to take Latin, there are actually two that have come up in my household with both of my sons. One, they learn grammar. That's any student who takes Latin learns grammar, and because they learn grammar when they take Latin, that helps them with English, with their speaking and writing skills. And then that also helps them when they get to standardized testing and college entrance exams. So for both of those reasons, that flexibility with writing then creates benefits beyond just the curricular benefits for students. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've now exhausted the room, so
Just is like a, relevant to what was discussed, when do we have a discussion related to our curriculum budget? Do we have, what date is that?
March 3rd.
March 3rd? Okay, thanks.
Can I add something, just because I mentioned to you a minute ago, there was, in regards to what Mr. Oley said, there was actually an evaluation of the ELA program. I actually found it, I unfortunately left it on my bulletin board, and I found a piece of paper that talked about the ELA evaluation, so you might want to find that and send that to somebody. I don't know. I found, there was one done. I don't remember off the top of my head because I left it. I was going to bring it with me tonight. Yeah, of the ELA. You mentioned ELA, I think, right? There was an evaluation of that program done. I think it was 2016. I can't remember. I got to go back and look.
Yeah, we'll look for the document.
But yeah, I don't have that, so I didn't bring it. I know it was going to come up.
I guess we'll now move on to Ms. Stein and the presentation on the operations and finance. Oh,
Yeah,
Dr. Harrison, sorry.
well, it's both of us.
Start.
So good evening. This officially kicks off one of the most important and one of the probably most difficult processes annually in the school calendar when we begin to develop our budget. So tonight we're going to start by touching a little bit on some issues related to the budgetary climate, challenges that are facing not only Irvington but public schools in New York State in general. And then we're going to delve deeply into our operations and finance budget and our proposals for this school year. As always, and I always like to look to Mr. Hanna because this slide was inspired by him, I think 2 years ago, and it has really resonated with us. And so we've maintained it because it really speaks to who we are as a district. It relates to our strategic plan and really how we should be looking at our budget and our overall decision-making in the district. And I don't want to read to you, but when we step back and we take a look at this, that if we want to stand behind our mission, if we want to stand behind that vision that we share for our school district, there's certain things that we always have to keep in mind. And that's supporting each and every student's academic and social-emotional growth with continually improving programs. And I think we see lots of example of that, and we spoke of evidence of that recently tonight. Looking at well-maintained and flexible learning spaces. So herein lies our capital project, right? Everything we're doing is built around that. We're thinking about our staff being supported with high-quality professional learning. We talk about the value of that. Again, this evening, without even thinking about this presentation, I referenced the professional learning in which our staff engaged in all 4 of our school buildings that not only impacts their support of children, but it relates directly back to that first bullet that we talked about. So just examples of that alignment. And then our fiscal health is sustainable because we have tax cap compliant budgets. We consider capital bonds once in a while when necessary and when responsible. Again, another linkage to where we're doing. And then we're able to withstand those occasional challenges by being responsible with our budgeting and our funding. So we're going to be able to delve into all of that deeper as we go through. But as I referenced, all that we do is linked back to our strategic plan. The strategic plan that was developed by the community, supported by the Board of Education. And not only do we have a vision, not only do we have a mission, but we have 6 strategic objectives that we constantly link everything back to. So we almost look at some of the reference to it and the linkage as bookends of the school year. We start off in setting and communicating our goals in September, and every goal is linked directly back to one of these strategic objectives. And as we go through our budget process and we look at any considerations for additions to the budget, we again link them back to the strategic objectives by number. So that said, when we're thinking about this alignment and thinking about budget and that vision, everything that we do engages planning and has lots of process. So we have that alignment. But when we have challenges, sometimes we're going to have to put things on hold. So we think about process, we think about priorities. And earlier we referenced social work. We know there's a need, there's a priority there. Early world language, there's a commitment to that. Let's say we faced some real challenges this year and we weren't able to get to implementing the second phase of early world language. That would stay on our radar as a priority for years to come. We don't let those things go because we believe in them. They're true to our vision and they're aligned with our strategic plan. An example of where we did that, and referenced by members of the audience tonight, was Project Lead the Way. Initially, we came in with a plan that was going to be implemented over 2 to 3 years, and realistically, because of fiscal constraints, it took us 5 years to be able to roll it out. But here we are today with a program that we believe in, that the community asked for, that's aligned with the strategic objectives, and is a coherent, well-aligned program K through 12. That said, when we think about the challenges that are consistently around us, we have to think about the national and state political landscape. I can't think of a time where I've seen more competing interests occurring in and around public education policy and dollars. We're seeing more examples of education being legislated either from DC or Albany than we've seen ever before. You think about everything that's happening right now coming from DC. Almost every single day I get an email that's coming from an educational professional organization, an advocacy group, or professional organizations or professional literature like EdWeek that is talking about what is coming out of DC, public dollars that are being pushed towards private schools, whether it be vouchers, increasing funding opportunities for private schools. We're seeing the same thing now coming from Albany more than before, and a lot of similarities. So it's not necessarily coming down to politics of thinking Republican or Democrat, because we're seeing it coming from both sides right now, and it's really posing lots of challenges. When we look at the New York State budget, there's millions of dollars that's being increased in funding in the governor's proposed budget for private schools to be able to support the implementation of New York State learning standards. Yet we're not seeing the same level of increase for public schools that have that same responsibility. So it's really disheartening. There's going to be advocacy that's going to be necessary in the coming month or so when we see what begins to happen in Albany to really protect our interests here locally in Irvington and to maintain our commitment to public education statewide. We also have to be mindful of the mandates that continually come down that are not funded by Albany or the federal government. And we need some assistance on these fronts. And here we identify a few of the recent examples over the last 3 years, things that have cost the district hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to implement. State aid is always a moving target. Right now, there's a number of dangerous proposals that are before the legislature. And
I'll speak to one. The one that's most concerning is the idea that they're going to shift our expense-based aids into foundation aid. And anybody who's into advocacy needs to be against this for public schools. It would be a big downfall for Boces, because that's one of the areas where you're aided based on what you've spent. And it's encouraging to use the shared services that Boces offers. It's often helpful to us when they negotiate prices on our behalf and keep our costs down. And yet they're going to say, oh, well, no, that's just capped at whatever number you had last year plus 2% or plus the CPI. And that's going to be very detrimental to us. Transportation aid would be another huge risk if they do that. So that would mean if we would have to go out and renegotiate a new contract for, that's way above CPI, which often happens in the transportation world because of the bus driver shortage that's going on right now, we would be stuck with this year, 1.8% increase. I'm forecasting a way higher than that. It's just, that would really be bad for us. And so transportation, and also with transportation aid, we're not even getting a regional cost index on our transportation aid, which is really hurting Westchester. So we're being aided like with the upstate districts. And that's another thing we're advocating for, is to actually add a regional cost index to our formula. So there's other pieces we're advocating for, but not maybe going to get. Building aid, there's a lot of different proposals out there. While they immediately wouldn't affect us because we've already have our project approved, they could definitely hurt us in the future. And we're against a lot of those proposals as well. So those are the things we need to be strong in our advocacy against. I know the superintendents meet with legislators, board members do, I know the business officials do, so there's a lot of, hopefully there's other advocacy going on against that, but that would be very bad for us.
So just a quick question with the capital aid. I mean, we just approved the bond with this idea that we'd get approximately 20% plus or minus. Is the language in the proposal clear that that's safe? Or,
Yes.
'cause I'd heard that it wasn't clear.
No, that's safe. Okay, but you know what, Michael, I'll say that's safe, but nothing that we do in Albany is safe. So they're constantly changing formulas, and what's not safe for us right now is their actual building aid ratio, because that number is based on different factors, and those numbers seem to change. And that's where the cost indexes are hurting us, because they're not taking into consideration our numbers. They're looking at our assessed value growing, and that's lowering our aid ratio. So as our assessed value in the property goes up, that aid ratio is going down. So they don't care about a lot of other factors. So right now, we are in a little bit of period of a growth in that, so it's hurting us. But that's continually changing. So, and then the other piece of it is that the formulas go back multiple years. They cross years. It's very complicated. But I still haven't digested all of the aid. But I will tell you that if you were to look in a public document, you'll see that Irvington's foundation aid increased $100 and something thousand, and yet it was $6,800 or something. So they're just taking those other aids and they're putting it, and they're saying it's foundation aid. So it's very detrimental to us. So don't believe what you're hearing or reading. It's not there right now. Now, they may come out with round 2, and that's usually what ends up happening, but we'll see.
Yeah, so there's certainly alarming things, and what you're seeing in that case is really like a shell game, where the governor is literally moving money from one pot to another. And really, when we think about those putting caps on the different expense-based aids, in my mind, it's almost like a cap within a cap, right? So by putting it in there, building it into another formula, it's limiting the aid and the monies that will be due to school districts. So it's just another way of limiting the funding that would actually come from outside of Irvington and Tarrytown. When we think of the tax cap, again, just a reminder, it's not a true 2%. It was always billed as a 2% cap, but in reality, we know it fluctuates from year to year depending on market factors, so it's hard to be able to forecast. If we recall back in, I want to say it was November, when Carol did the long-range financial plan and she mapped out scenarios. In there, she specifically notes how we are making estimates, and we won't know what that will be from year to year. We've had many conversations in this room about unpredictable tax certs. Tax certs certainly are really damaging to our funding here in Irvington, and when we consider being a small school district and having a large commercial zone, such as 119, within our boundaries, it really has consistent exposure for the school district. And when we think about changes in enrollment, while we think of that, we've all read about the trends nationally about declining enrollments in schools, a lot of declining enrollment. Our enrollment has been relatively flat, so it's been very, very fortunate because we're able to sustain programs. But at the same time, when we think about changes in enrollment, you can have changes within your existing enrollment. So where we kind of stand around that number of 1,750 pretty consistently over the last handful of years, the needs of our students have shifted dramatically. And because of those shifts, there's different demands that are placed upon the schools and the classrooms on a daily basis that really impact our delivery of education, the resources that we have to purchase, and the programs that we have to provide with special education or otherwise. The needs are much, much greater. And then there are aspects of contractual obligations that are beyond our control, such as pension contributions and health insurance. But the reminder that we want to give here that our board and our administration has done one heck of a job in working with our bargaining units to negotiate fair, responsible contracts that not only treat our employees fairly today, but are also looking to the future and looking to control costs for the school district, wanting to make sure, if we go back to those first slides, thinking that we are making fiscally prudent decisions that are going to make sure that our school is here and fiscally secure in the future. So that said, before we were talking about foundation aid, and if the actual formula was run and funded, bless you, you can see what the impacts here would have been. In this school year alone, we would have had an additional $1.1 million of revenue coming in. Not your tax dollars, revenue coming straight into our district. And over the course of the period of time, if we look at this going back to 7, 8, $11.5 million has not come to Irvington that should have been there. Legislature, the governor has a responsibility to fund it, and they're not doing it. There's lots of discussion going on statewide about redoing the whole entire funding equation. Regardless of how it plays out, because of the finances, because of the socioeconomics, and a limited pool of money available, there aren't many scenarios that will serve our region well. So that said, when we think about recent budget history and where we've been, you can kind of see the growth through years and some fluctuation, some ups and downs based upon just the financial conditions, tax cap, and state aid really driving some of these factors here. Oops. And then budget trends. So when we think about where we've been over the years, lots of times when we sit there and we think about, geez, we've been fortunate to maintain some low increases, but we have to step back and think there are years where we overrode the tax cap because we had to preserve programs, we had to restore programs and bring more services to our children. But when we look since the reevaluation that occurred, so you can see that point in which we shifted to a full valuation here locally, we started to look at our new trends, and now we can start to look forward and see where that's going to fall. Here, I think I want to add a note for the board and the community that we're going to see a larger budget-to-budget increase than we've seen in recent years, and that happens on a number of different fronts. One, because we have a little bit healthier of a tax cap formula this year, as Carol referenced, a minute increase in our state aid. But if you remember the new local legislation with the increase in sales tax and the sales tax revenues coming back to the school district, we're seeing additional revenues there. So Carol's early estimates were looking at about $225,000 in additional revenue. So when we look at these numbers here, 2.62%, 3.8%, we're going to be looking at a number that's going to be north of 5% likely, but that is still with a tax cap compliant budget. But that's just because of the revenues increasing in the school district. Carol, if there's anything else to add?
No, that's about right. It's hard to exactly predict the revenues yet. That's why we kind of wait till the superintendent's budget, because I don't have all that data yet, but it's looking positive for us in that regard. So the next slide was talking about fund balance, and everybody always wants to know what fund balance is and what are we doing with it. So fund balance results when you have a surplus at the end of a year. You hopefully have a surplus because you can't have a deficit. So that's, if you have a deficit, you're having lots of other visits by the state controller, and you start getting people assigned to you to oversee what you're doing. So we never could be in that situation. So a budget, again, is a plan. It's something made now for next year, so you can't be 100% exact with it. You have to build in contingency for a bad winter, for things that might happen. So when that does happen and we've had the extra, it goes into what's called our fund balance. And the first thing we look to do with it is, well, we need to, if we've appropriated any as a revenue source, we need to put that back in the revenue source. So that's called appropriated fund balance. And then after that, we look to fund basically it's a bucket that's basically unreserved. It's a 4% bucket, we call that. And that's really because the state controller has also said, you really should have that cushion of 4%. You should just always have that, and then you're not in any fiscal stress if you can maintain that. So on one hand, you know, they don't want us to have too much fund balance, but on the other hand, they say, no, you need to maintain this. I don't know too many businesses that have 4%. I think they would have way more than 4%. But again, this is public money, so that's really the recommended number at this point. So basically, what could we use it for? We use our 4% to fund our first couple of months until we get our tax revenue in October. We have been fortunate that we've had just enough to not have to get a tax anticipation note. We were pretty close this year to needing one, but you know, we're always there. And we also have to make sure that, you know, when we're looked at for borrowing, when we're going to go out for our band soon, if we didn't have any type of fund balance or cushion reserves, that would negatively affect the bond, the amount of interest we're going to have to pay. So they are going to look at that and say, yes, you do have some reserves if something would happen in the school district, because they want to look at our ability to pay them back. So that's a piece that's always in my mind as we try to keep increasing our reserves just enough to make sure that we can cover contingencies. So that's really what we use our fund balance for. So keep in mind, it's still the taxpayers' money. It's not like we're wasting it. We're using it to maintain programs in the future and to handle today's needs.
So that said, we step back and we take a bit of an overview of our budget process. And you can see where we stand today with operations and finance. And then on March 3rd, we'll move forward with curriculum and instruction. And then we actually get into discussion around proposed budget on the 17th of March. So we'll have a great St. Patrick's Day here together. And following that, we have a couple meetings for the board to be able to discuss options with the administration and the community, and then ultimately the board will adopt the budget here on the 14th, and then of course the vote and trustee election, where there are 3 seats open for the first time in Irvington this year. So that said, we're also supplementing this with a number of community presentations, preschool, the village trustees, the PTSA, and a couple other opportunities for dialogue and answer questions of the community before the budget vote. So we always start here with the charge of the board, and the board to think about what that ceiling for the budget is, looking at responsible growth, determining where we want to go with fund balance and a fund balance allocation each and every year. And then we always want to keep in mind that we're maintaining a financially sustainable future. Lots of critical discussions are going to be had. We'll find that this year, where we do have a healthy tax cap, we don't have much room to consider options. So when we go through this round of presentations tonight and then on the 3rd with curriculum instruction, you're only going to see a handful of new considerations that are going to come forward, because otherwise we're going to run right into that ceiling or the cap that we spoke of before. So here we go. So the linkage back to the strategic plan. Strategic objective number 6, ensure the fiscal health of the school district to provide for a high quality and learning environment. So when we think about that, we think about looking about everything that we're doing financially, its impact on the school district. We're thinking about our facilities. We're thinking about how we're providing for future needs, and that we're continually investing in our infrastructure. We're not just thinking facilities. You got to think of everything else that we have around here. There's human resource infrastructure. That reference to professional development does come up. So a linkage here to student learning. And then, of course, we think IT as having an infrastructure that we have to invest in every year. The reference to the phones in our report earlier this evening, that is a part of the infrastructure that we have to maintain, and monies are included in this budget to support many things like that. So there's general categories or components within the business and operations budget. The Board of Education, which consists of board costs, the district clerk, and the annual district meeting, the budget vote process. The chief school administrator category, which is my office, my assistant, and other related district-level expenses. Finance, everything that goes into managing the finances of the district, from Carol and all of her staff and functions, including food services. We have legal, human resources, public information. That is a whole other area, and largely all contracted services, being a small school district. Facilities and operations, and we have our fine Mr. Knowles, our facilities director, here tonight to be able to answer any questions that you may have. So central data processing, which is the administrative side of our technology infrastructure. Special items with insurance, our responsibilities and obligations with Boces, sewer taxes, tax cert refunds, and so on. Transportation, ongoing debt service, and then transfer to other funds, which is something we don't see a ton of action.
Well,
in.
we do always have the special aid fund.
The special
We're
aid
responsible for 20% of the summer special ed costs. That's also another risk of a proposal that's out there. They want to transfer more to us always, so it's always a risk.
Right, so when we think of the overall pie of our budget, tonight we're dealing with a smaller portion of it. And you can see how it's broken down into the general support, facilities, transportation, debt, and then the largest part, the 77%, being instruction and benefits related to our employees. So year-to-year budget variances, there's always going to be variances and increases that occur before we even consider anything new. So we think about increases in salaries, we think about supporting our facilities and the ongoing maintenance that is necessary. We have BOCES expenditures that we must pay each and every year. Technology, infrastructure, equipment, we think constantly the need to expand bandwidth and improve our Wi-Fi infrastructure in each of our buildings. Special education tuitions to meet our students' needs. They increase just like everything else does. The many different insurance that we hold in the district. Carol, we've referenced transportation being a regular challenge, and that's a reminder that we're looking at transportation for not only our in-district students, we're thinking about our residents that attend out-of-district schools that we have an obligation to transport. Also have to think about our athletics programs and field trips where there's all costs involved. And then debt service, of course, and that follows a known schedule that we're actually able to really predict well. So that said, it brings us to where we are, and to think about some of these considerations that we'll move through and link to a variety of different categories. And here we start thinking about health and safety. We have disinfectant sprayers that have been utilized in our schools. You can see our linkage back to the strategic plan. But we piloted this at Dow's Lane, and we were able to see the real benefits that the sprayers have in being able to clean our classrooms in a very efficient way, and to do so in a way, Gary, that we would say is eco-friendly, environmentally responsible. We have a need for another pickup truck. If you may remember, this has been a conversation for the last couple of years, and this was an item that we carried over from last year. Not only is it just a pickup truck, so you see that figure of $63,000, which you can think, geez, we could buy a pickup truck cheaper than 63 grand. But this needs to be a larger vehicle because not only are we plowing with it, but it serves as our salt spreader. So it has to be able to carry the weight of the salt and the actual spreading device itself. Here, I would say that we have reached out to the village to be able to see if this could be an opportunity for a shared service where we would still plow our spaces, but if the village could actually come through and salt our parking lots and our roadways for us. Unfortunately, after some consideration, the village identified that they couldn't support it within their own infrastructure and thought that by adding that responsibility would hinder their ability to maintain our local roads. So had that been the case, and had there been an option there for us to partner with the village, we could have seen this cost, this expenditure for a truck drop dramatically because we would have been able to buy a lesser vehicle. We're also looking at a shared service for a security consultant. Following that theme of things that we've talked about in the past, the safety and security of our students and staff is always our top priority. We talked about this need last year because the world of safety and security in schools has changed dramatically. Not only do we think about the threats, the concerns that are presented almost on a daily basis across the nation, and I don't even want to reference the horrible, horrific situations that have occurred, but we've taken so many steps to make our schools safer. And as we head into this summer, we have massive security projects underway. We're going to be enclosing our campus. We're going to be building vestibules at a number of our schools. We're going to be installing new locking systems, swipe card access systems. So who's going to help us oversee this? Who is going to manage these systems for us? We think about the complex needs around emergency management. I look to Ms. Kashkin when there was an emergency just this week, or last week, when we think about the lockout scenario. And yes, you look at your school leaders, our principals, your district administrators. We are all trained, but we're not experts in safety and security. We have protocols that we follow like that. We know them inside and out. We receive a phone call with the concern that was presented in the community, potentially somebody with a gun not too far, about a half a mile from Dow's Lane. And within 2 minutes, every school was on lockout, and we were communicating our protocols, had security processes in place. But who is leading all that work, who is evaluating the effectiveness of that work, are folks that are not involved in safety and security, that do not have that expertise. Who is overseeing our security guards that we have in our schools? Not only do we have the security greeters in each of our buildings, we have 2 roving guards that are here walking perimeter, providing security on our school campuses. We need oversight and coaching and guidance for those folks. So we have lots of new processes that we have to continue to evaluate, processes that we have to put in place to support our new needs. And frankly, it's not on within our capacity. And I look at Carol, who carries a lot of this responsibility. I look at Gary, who has a piece of it. I carry a piece of it. We simply can't do it all. And the reporting requirements on this front are overwhelming. So last year, we looked to partner with Dobbs Ferry in this initiative. Unfortunately, we could not support it within our school district budget. And Dobbs Ferry found it necessary to move forward, and they funded the position on their own. They have their own full-time person, and they have been thrilled with the experiences they've had. Not only do they feel that their staff is more trained, better trained by having an expert on site, they have someone that's constantly evaluating the safety and security of every one of their school facilities, addressing the problems that are present. And when there's a crisis that arises, such as the one last week, they have someone there that's an expert managing it for them. Carol has heard lots of great stories and anecdotes from her counterpart there, as I have, and they said they don't know what they would do without it today. So where last year the conversation was looking at partnership with Dobbs Ferry, this year we're having conversation with Ardsley and looking to share this position. Something that we think is critical, but being mindful, it is also something that is an aidable service, so we will get a nice return on this in following years. We're also looking to increase some staffing in the business office, looking for an additional part-time clerical staff member in the business office. Currently, Carol and our treasurer handle too many things. Carol's an executive that should be managing our finances, should be evaluating our finances, building new systems and protocols to support better operations on the business side in the school district, and she simply can't do it with the time available and the resources before her. We also have a very, very talented treasurer who also has his school business official license, and because of that, we could begin to entrust him to lead many business operations, but we have to be able to free Carol up. We have to be able to free Evan up to be able to run a more efficient business office. So we would like to add another half-time employee to be able to support those needs within the business office. So that said, we start to walk through the different budget categories that I outlined earlier. We have the proposed Board of Education budget, and you can see a nominal variance here, and really nothing to speak of. Office of School Administrator, we can look to salary increases, insurance increases, and so on associated with that. No notable variances. Our proposed finance budget.
I just want to stop, Chris, 1 second.
Yeah.
So for the community and the people in the audience, the board and the community listening, there is the detailed document that goes with this presentation that gives you a little bit more information based on subcategories, so you can follow along with that. We don't put it all up on the slide because it would be way too small for anyone to see, so we kind of just give the highlights of the information tonight. But all that detail is there, and will also be on our website with the presentations.
Yeah. So this presentation and the backup documents will be posted by the end of the week on the website. And with every iteration of the budget and the adjustments we make, those documents are constantly updated as well. And so there'll be a nice inventory of process that you'll be able to refer to. So the proposed finance. So when we look at the variances here, really the only things that stand out are looking at the contractual salaries. You can see some variation in equipment supplies, again, some contractual services. And the new consideration when we see that one major variance is really associated with that additional position that I referenced a little while ago. Once again, when we come into human resources and other related services, very, very little variance once again. Facilities operation maintenance. When we sit here and we think about that, this is an area where we truly start from the bottom and build up, where we consider a push-ahead category because we always have to continue to maintain things. We are always having to invest in updating facilities outside of a capital project. Here, there's things we always, Gary goes through a budget development process with each and every school leader, and then at the district level, where we go line by line. Every $1,000 that you see in these totals, we go through to make sure it is a top priority. And you got to know that there's lots of things that come up that don't make it to this list, and some which we'll reference later. So when we look at some of the variances, you can see them listed there on the left-hand side. And we, certainly, Carol, if there's any color you want to add to the variance on the left.
Yeah, so in the equipment, usually what I show as a new consideration would be something that was really above the level that we budgeted previous years. One of the other pieces of equipment we're buying within the push-ahead, or if you want to call it the push-ahead allowance, I call that, is the Orbio cleaning systems, which makes solutions via an ionic method, and maybe Gary could talk to a little bit more, but what that does is it creates cleaning solution that you don't need bottles for, and it's very efficient, so we're not recycling nearly as much. And that's why you see a small decrease in supplies, because you actually don't have to buy the cleaning solution. You're making it with these machines. So that's one of the things we did include. Then, I had to basically pick which one I was going to fund, the Orbio or the Clorox sprayers. So we ended up saying one's a new consideration, but really they're both needs from us at the cleaning point of view. Contractually, there's an increase because there's some new inspection and certification needs that we have. One of them is for boilers, and it potentially could cost us $10,000. We're still looking into whether or not we as a district have to comply with this, but apparently it's quite expensive to do this certification process. It's a mandate that, again, is coming down from, I think, the county this time, maybe the state, and it's, again, one of these unfunded mandates that's hitting facilities this time. So the other thing we noticed with the contractual is some of our inspections and maintenance inspections have gone up, like the elevator contract. So those contractors are very specialized, and they're difficult to keep it at a lower level. They've been raising their fees. But elevators are something that you need to maintain. So there's not a lot of wiggle room on some of those things. Utilities are fairly flat. I actually did move the phone system into the into the utilities line where it really belongs now that we've done it. It's an operating lease, so it goes into that category as opposed to a debt service. So depending on where, how you structure your financing for it, because it's an operating lease, it goes here. So you'll see that number increase there is really that. Building repairs and improvements, the key ones that, the themes that we're doing this year, bottle filling stations, we're budgeting more money for that. That is a need and an ask from all of our administrators to add more bottle filling stations. Again, part of a recycling issue, sustainability needs, that's something that's been identified. We'll be doing increasing the electrical capacity within classrooms. There's always a need for seemingly more electric, and also to support the air conditioning units that we're putting into classrooms. So we're going to be pretty much completing classroom air conditioning with this phase. I think with pretty much 100% at the end of this budget year, next year's budget year. So we've been fortunate. We've been able to do as many of them we can this year, and then we'll be finishing it next year. So that the money in the building repair improvements includes the air conditioning. We'll be adding playground mulch. That's desperately needed. Some years we can add more, other years we don't add, but we really need to do a complete playground mulch addition this year to ensure the safety there. There's various painting projects every year. So basically, we've maintained a certain level of painting projects, and there's always some ceiling and tile repair that needs to go on in walls, ceilings, and things like that. We did bring the number down. You'll see that difference of 55,000, and that's for two reasons. One is partially because we've using the capital project to fund some of the more needy projects that we've been doing, and secondly, because I'm really hoping with that decrease, we can fund our truck, because we just need that truck right now. So had I said, oh, let's maintain the same budget level, that would have made it more difficult to propose having this truck in this year. So this is the year to do it, and then when we have to continue to be investing in the capital projects or other types of projects, we would still have that funds in the budget to jump off from. So that's our recommendation in terms of that at the moment.
Yeah, and then Carol, if I may interject, when you referenced the classroom air conditioners, the board and community may recall when we began our planning process for the capital project, one thing that we investigated was that idea of installing central cooling in each of our buildings. And just the back of the envelope math by our architects came back with a number they said was going to be easily north of $10 million. So we quickly shelved that idea. We're looking at, in the capital project, air conditioning our large spaces in each of the buildings. And then we committed to, we developed a 3-year plan for providing individual AC units in each classroom space. And so we're actually in year 2, and we're going to be achieving that goal. So we're actually moving faster than we thought. So we're excited about that. And then the new considerations are listed that I discussed earlier.
Just one more thing, Chris. The one more risk that we might have is in utilities. So as we put these air conditioners in, we're going to see an electrical increase. I didn't particularly budget a larger increase because with the LED light project coming on, that's going to reduce some of our electrical costs. So there should be an offset here. It's going to be an interesting year to tell next year as we do the analysis, and we're doing some benchmarking now. So I'll have a better handle, and I hope I'm not coming back to you in another year saying we're going to need a whole lot more in electrical. But it is a risk because once you start putting on these units and people using them, like even on a warm day in the winter, we can't just turn our boiler off. Those air conditioners may go on. Students will be comfortable, staff will be comfortable, but learning will go on, but we might have some more electrical usage. So we just need to keep that in mind and start to manage that a little bit.
Great. So we always have some additional details associated with the budget. Carol, I think you really spoke to the vast majority of this already. But when we think about the additional considerations that are here, there's the shared service safety coordinator, again, anticipatedly being shared with Ardsley. That $63,000 cost, Carol's estimating that return in aid that I referenced before, 56%. So actually, we'd be looking at a net cost in year 2 of $27,720. The new pickup truck we referenced before, I already spoke to the second bullet there. Unfortunately, it's just not looking like it's in the cards right now, but we'll continue to pursue the opportunity when possible. Central data processing. So, Carol, do you want to speak a little bit about some of the shifts
So
here?
these are what I would call the infrastructure. When we're talking about infrastructure, again, this is not just infrastructure rebuilding, but this is an infrastructure of our computer network. This is a portion of our IT contract with Edutech. It's also software that runs our virus protection, all those types of programs, all of our networking, basically. And it's switches, because this is the thing, there's only so much traffic that can go on one particular network switch, so there's additional funds for switches in there. We're constantly increasing our wireless access saturation, meaning how many points that you have in order to be able to access wireless. There's a huge demand. We're technology users, and that's just the reality now. So we've made a lot of improvement. This is continuing the same level. But there's always still those needs, and there's a replacement cycle we have in terms of what's being needed. So we're not recommending a huge increase, just the maintenance here, but the dollars itself are going to different products every year. Some things are the same, but some things are different, so the equipment portion is zero-based, but we try to maintain the same level. I had requests for probably north of $300,000, but we're not going to, fund all that. So we're going to continue to fund a base level and look for the most important things.
And then our special items. So we're looking at this where they really speak for themselves and looking at the different taxes that we have to address. And that one shift is self-explanatory. When we look at the Boces administrative fees and capital charges that we have an obligation to pay as a constituent district, in doing so, we're looking at a variance of about $12,000. And see the note, it's really due to their cost increases for their retiree health insurance. Boces is really in a position where they're paying, I think, more insurance for retired folks than they are for active employees at this point in time.
They have made considerable contract changes, so going forward, this will lessen a little bit.
So transportation is always a tricky one. When we're looking at the variances here, we're really looking at variances in CPI price increases. We're considering the opportunity to rebid the in-district routes. So the figures here are based on estimates that have been developed between Carol and our transportation folks. But as Carol referenced before, it is such a tricky area. Bus companies are really territorial. So if you look at a bus company that's here and has the Irvington turf, so to speak, or the Quad Villages, a lot of other companies won't come in and bid against them. A lot of the transportation companies have also now become unionized shops. So now they're dealing with more organized labor, that they are demanding higher wages, better quality benefits. And as has been publicized nationally, there's a tremendous bus driver shortage. There just aren't enough staff members out there. So companies are having to pay folks to keep them on board.
And this is one area where it's a little bit premature to put these slides up, so it's a tough one to do early, but we have met as a quad group to go over some cost containment measures. We are in the process of working on trying to find a consultant to help us with that, because we did budget some funds for that this year. We have a bunch of ideas, and at some point, we may have to have some, if these costs continue to go up, some serious discussions at a board level on, whether or not we want to make some central stops for private school pickups. There's certain things ideas we have on the table, and I will be sending you some more information on that in the future. We're just not quite there yet on that, but there's a whole lot of ideas. But it's going to take a concerted effort for the 4 districts to get together on some of these ideas to maybe contain some of the costs. Vic has done a really good job this year. We actually had more students going, but we had just about the same amount of cost for the private school runs. He was able to consolidate some. I get calls all the time that, we've creeped up their time on the bus. It was only 45 minutes last year, and now it's 60 minutes this year. Technically, we can go 90 minutes, and so that's another discussion. It's tough to say to somebody, that your kid has to go 90 minutes on the bus, but we're trying to combine different schools. So we're looking at other alternatives, maybe with these central pickups that might make the route shorter, at the same time, keep the route to an hour, but keep the cost down. So those are all things we're looking at right now. Field trips, athletics, we had a big increase this year with the new contract because they're charging us a minimum of that 4-hour bus time. So that's been tough, but the service has been a little bit better, so I guess maybe there was some silver lining there. This is a tough one, and it also is student dependent. On any given year, we don't really always know who's going to be signing up for that private school bus and how many special ed kids we have to transport and where. So it's a moving mix.
So we come down, I believe.
Debt service. So debt service is really, again, just a known schedule. We have a couple of loans that are nearing the end here. A couple of our borrowings are nearing the end, but we also had to put some money in the budget next year to fund our BAN, which is our bond anticipation note. So if you remember, I anticipate doing a BAN this spring, which will result in interest for next year, and then a BAN again the following year, and then we'll go to a bond. So that will align with the the time when these other ones go down. Band interest rates are kind of low right now, so we're actually looking at a very favorable market. I'm being conservative, but I want to make sure I have enough in here to cover the interest. So I might have a little bit of a positive variance, which would go into fund balance, but I have to plan for something because I really can't predict what those rates will be, so.
And then we have the overall summary of the business and operations category of the budget. So on the left, you can see the push-ahead budget, which we spoke of before, and category by category, the variance and the overall variance of 1.47%. And then on the right-hand side, when we look at the handful of considerations that we presented to you tonight, the cost of those, and then the overall variance of complete variance of about 2.75%. But then again, I just want to highlight that you look at that new budget consideration category, $183,000. We could look at that from a couple different lenses and with a couple different points of views. Someone that hasn't been a student of budgets in the school district and the work that we've done over the years could step back and say, geez, what's going on? Why don't they have more ambition there? Or why, even though we know there's budget limitations, why aren't we trying harder to do more on this front? And you could say the same thing when we get to the curriculum and instruction side. But what that speaks to, the progress that we've made, the areas that we've addressed, that we developed a budget that is sustaining our needs. And that development of a budget is not a one-year step. It is a process that has happened with our administration over recent years and the leadership of the Board of Education. So we're looking at stability. It also makes me think of conversation that we had going back to fall 2018 when there was a kind of an enriched presentation in around our long-range plan when we talked about the capital project, the financial side of things, but we also talked about the human resource side. And what does it mean for our district, a district with our objectives, with the level of ambition that we have, the vision that we have for the education, what would it mean to be fully employed? And we started to look at those projections. And we're slowly chipping away at that list. And we're delivering a really efficient program for our students, putting together budgets that are fiscally responsible for our community. That said, and to completely recap here, you saw that alignment with our strategic goals, the strategic objectives throughout the entire presentation. We're continuing to make those connections between our facilities and maintenance and how it impacts student experiences. We are committed to maintaining our facilities. Our schools look better than they ever have from the commitment of this community and the hard work of our staff. We're continuing to address those needs that are always coming forward. Once again, we're addressing the security concerns that have been cited by staff and community members over time. And knowing that this is the first real formal discussion that we're having, that these topics will all be under consideration and adjustments will be made until we get to that point in April when the board adopts the budget. So that said, here's an overview once again of our budget process, the dates of all of those different important meetings. And now, Mr. President, the conversation is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I guess if there's anyone who has questions, wants to go first, feel free to jump in.
Can I start? Oh, sorry. Okay, good. Good, you want me sure? Carol, first, thank you so much for all the data you put together, and it was helpful to see the actuals, which I missed on my first go-around on the budget slide, so that was immensely helpful. I had a couple of questions, and you may not know the answers to some of these off the cuff, so I'm not trying to ask you something out of the blue. It just some things that just sort of popped up as we went through this. As we look at the tax cert budget, which obviously is low compared to what our real exposure might be, and we have some contingencies in other line items, do we want to budget it more under the tax cert line, since it's very possible we're going to have that type of exposure for next year, and just sort of consolidate some of those contingencies there?
Right, so keep in mind, we do have a tax cert reserve still available to us. It is starting to go down, and we look to fund that every year at the end with our fund balance. So we try to keep putting back in any type of surplus. So this is a start that we did last year with budgeting some money. We've never budgeted any in the last couple of years, so it's a start. Sure, would I like to put more, but again, that's why we say these are all things under consideration.
Okay.
If we were to get some lovely state aid increase, then I might recommend that. But right now, with all the competing needs, it's a little bit difficult, premature to say that I would add anything to that at this point. But it's something that we should consider.
Okay. Can I keep going? And for transportation, if I recall correctly, last year there was discussion not just about revisiting some of the private school routes, but even just looking internally to the span of transportation that we offer within the community. And is that something that's still on the table, that we want to revisit, sort of, how much busing we're offering and how far within the community we're offering that busing?
So are you
And-
talking about increasing the mileage that would be allowable? So that's.
That was something that came up last year, so I'm just curious where we landed on that.
To add, didn't we add money into the budget this year for a transportation
Yes,
study?
and I'm working on that right now.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
That was
you know,
specifically, we go back, and I can remember the conversations with Mrs. Hargraves specifically about that, and it was the one meeting that you missed last year, that that was specifically looking at out-of-district transportation was the intent there, and that's what Carol is collaborating on with the Quad Cooperative now. But anything that would be looking to increase the mileage would have to go to the voters
Okay.
on election day to do that.
Is that something we'd want to cost out, just to understand what that
take a
would
look at
result
that,
in?
and if that falls within the amount we budgeted for the transportation consultant, I can try to add that in, but we'll see.
And then,
Can I just,
yeah, go ahead.
related to that, can we get a, sort of, whatever the RFP is for that transportation?
Yeah, I haven't even started it, Michael, but
Yeah.
first we were defining the needs, and, as we meet with the quad, and then now I'm gonna start working on that next piece of it. So everything is like.
Oh, absolutely, but
Yeah.
when that's put together, just so we can review what the scope is?
Yep.
Or maybe in a little analysis of it, because isn't an RFP like that many pages?
But I guess it varies.
It's funny, because there are consultants out there, but a lot of them wanna just look at your routing, and they don't really wanna tackle these larger issues. So it's hard to find the right person, but we'll put together the RFP, we'll reach out, see what we get, and then we'll go from there. But first, I really want to identify the issues we want solved, and
That's right.
so that's kind of the starting point, and then we're gonna keep going.
Well, maybe that's probably what we're more interested in, is the issues to be solved
Right.
more so
Right.
than they are.
Yep, so I'll be working on that.
Great.
It's on my to-do list.
Thanks.
And then I was curious if we had an update on the usage of the after-school bus routes that we had put in place last year, with one that was running north and one that was running south.
We eliminated that.
Oh, we did eliminate it.
Yeah, we eliminated that with this budget, that we
Okay.
did some analyses throughout the course of the year, and the ridership unfortunately wasn't there.
But what we do see is high school students riding on the middle school bus. So if they have an extended period, they will then hop on the middle school bus, and we've been very lenient with allowing that as long as the behavior's there.
Okay.
There haven't been any real issues, so, it's because they're really running the same route that they would be running for the high school route, so.
Can I keep going? Forgive me if you answered this, but you mentioned you moved the phone expense into the utilities line. Which line did you move it out of?
So out of debt service.
Out of that service?
But last year I put $60,000 in debt service just because I needed to put the placeholder.
Okay.
So basically, we've always had a phone expense in the facilities line, and what we've been paying for over the last several years is costs of the company to come and make changes to our system, fix it when it's been repairing. So the actual increases, and we've actually been spending several thousands of dollars fixing our phones in the last couple of years. So our new operating lease will cover all of the maintenance, all of the phone changes, anything we need. So that's the kind of the lease we have. So it's an operating lease, kind of like the copiers. It's not a debt service.
Right.
So I didn't include it in debt service. So I just made a switch. I didn't know how I was going to finance it at the time, last year.
That's fine, and then you were starting to talk about the CDP costs. Can you just go through the central data processing costs?
Okay.
Can you just, what was the change from the 18, and I don't know if you'll know this off the top of your head, no pressure, from the 18-19 actuals, which isn't on the slide, it's on the detail sheet? There's a big increase from the actuals for 18-19 to the budget for 19-20. So I'm assuming there was a push, something new that maybe we did this year?
In the 1680?
In the, hold on. In 1680, yes, 1680-200. So I know you've itemized all the costs that are in central data processing line. I'm just curious what was new from 18-19 to, to the budget. It's on the equipment line specifically, because the actuals were about 90,000 and the budget's 189.
So again, you know, it's funny how year to year, sometimes, Aaron, we move money from the 1680 side to the 2630 to fund some of the instructional technology. So it really depends on how we're coding it. So I have to take a look at it in sum to answer that question.
Okay,
So
that's
I
fine.
would
That's
look at that in sum.
okay.
Because we do transfer money between the two codes, because sometimes it's considered instructional and sometimes it's considered infrastructure.
Okay.
So I budgeted just to have it, and then hopefully we, you know.
Yeah, and this is the first draft, obviously, too,
I'll
so you're
take a
going to
look
go
at that.
through and.
It's the
Okay.
200 equipment.
And then on the utilities line, I don't remember if 18-19 was an exceptionally warmer summer or winter or whatever, that the utilities line looks lower. I know you've moved phone into there,
So
but,
again,
and I'm
yeah,
sure
so-
that's where part of the contingency is, but.
Yeah, so partly is contingency. So again, if I'll talk about this, you cannot be in a deficit position. If we end up having a cold winter, something happens, there's a big price spike, maybe there's an oil shortage or war happen, like, we just can't be in a deficit position, and utilities is one area where no one ever really wants to budget thinly.
Yep.
I can predict salaries, I can predict things, I can't predict utilities. So that's one area
I
where
can
we.
appreciate all of that sentiment, trust me. So that's. Thanks, Carol. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you for asking the taxer question. That was one that I had as well. Just to clarify, the truck had also been an ask last year and didn't make it, so this is back.
It
and
was the
truck
year
is
before that
older
too,
and-
right?
And it was probably recommended 3 years ago and didn't even
Yeah.
make that presentation, so now we're,
Like the third time.
And
Well,
we've,
and-
and I
and
would
you
say
should-
we've spent, Gary, how much money to maintain that truck this year?
and counting, because it's still early in the season. And fortunately, knock on wood here, we haven't had as much snow. If, you know, that really just the wear and tear on it, so.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, first couple snows, it was in the shop the day the snow arrived. We didn't even know
And the
if we were
village
gonna
had
have
to help us out on an emergency basis.
Is this the one you were putting the plows on by hand?
one.
That was, I remember, we had.
Outside.
Outdoors, indoors.
Well, that part I know, that's from the bond conversation, but I remember, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
this is the
fortunately,
one
it's
with
been
the
a warm
salt
winter,
spreader.
but.
Can't say
And,
no anymore.
I know you've spoken to the village. Is that really a no, or is the door open for more conversation?
I kind of put that back on you guys. I mean,
Yeah, so there
you're
was.
the taxpayers, I mean, it's your budget both in the village and the school. They've kind of said no to us, but I think, you know,
I mean, do they come up here anyway for the development? No, because it's private.
no,
Okay,
that's Heritage Road, we own that road, unfortunately.
okay.
This he wants to-
Yeah, we have to, Gary, we maintain it from Broadway all the way up to the pillars, right?
It's also, I mean, and I'll just say this, it's also somewhat of a cost, because if, let's say, just say it's a weekend, and it's a light type of snow event or potential salt, you know, that salting event, and the village is out doing it, we now bring staff in, they would be doing it anyway for the rest of their roads, now I'm bringing staff in, because we have neighbors up the hill, because we maybe have something else going on, but if we really weren't having other events, we might not be doing that, but we are. So it is, you know, one of those things where I would love to see the village do this for us, it would save us, but, you know, something to explore even, I mean, we have to keep pushing back with them a little bit on how, and it might increase their costs, so it might increase your village budget somehow. I'm not saying they could do it for nothing.
Right.
But maybe we could figure out who could do it more efficiently.
Is Greenberg an option at all? Since we're part of Greenberg, is partnering with Greenberg an option at all for that? or-
Explore that, but, you know,
Not allocated that way. get our services from the villages that we're in and here
Right.
with villages.
The conversations, do we have a shared services committee? Is that the folks having this conversation? Do we have
So
board members on that?
The shared service didn't actually delve into this topic. It has been
Okay.
more looking at acquisition of land and space for facilities needs for both the village and the district. This has been a direct conversation that's been district leadership with village leadership.
Mhm. But I guess that might be one to add to the agenda at some point, is the who could do it more efficiently question.
Right.
And we're certainly a board voice, as a community member could weigh in. Do you have another question? I don't know who we were at, but the administrative support in your office, I think we all have a pretty good sense of the breadth and depth of work that your office takes on. Is this a role that could also help, like we have a few community members who like to FOIL us regularly? Could that person help with that, or not so much?
Depends. I mean, some of the gathering of the documents, yes. Some of the sheer copying and other requests for that, probably. I'm looking to free up some of the routine tasks, entering cash receipts, just some of the basic things that happen all the time. We're responsible for the John Cardinal O'Connor School and all the billing that goes with that. Time-consuming, very time-consuming. If you ever work with New York City, it's incredibly time-consuming, the amount of documentation you need to give them. All routine, but yet Evan is doing this. Because otherwise, we're going to forego that revenue, and we've got the expense side. So when I present that part of the budget, you'll always see that I say this is expenses and a revenue. But to get that revenue, there's work that needs to happen to get that done. Health service billing, things like that, those are all routine, can be freed up.
And I guess then, it's separate from the question about the FOIL, which we know is a chunk of work, with the routine work that you're describing, is that something that could be done through a contracted service versus an employee?
Again, it's not probably an outside contractor, no, because they have to still be able to, I could think about that a little, Michael, but before I answer that, but it's, again, you're letting somebody in the business office, confidential documents, maybe potentially, there's some issues there, and it probably would be a civil service issue.
I would say it would be a civil service issue. It
Because
would
they
be a
could
civil
probably
service
own that
class
work.
position,
Yeah.
and our local union would claim the position.
There are probably some of those issues there, too. But, again, like this week, we'll be working on the ESSA report due. First, it was the New York State Transparency that was due. Now it's the Maintenance of Effort document that's due. Now it's the ESSA document that's due, the ST3 that's due. These are all things that we're doing in addition to the day-to-day stuff. GASB 75 is a census. These are all things. If I tell you how much time these all take, and every school district does this, regardless of their size, size doesn't matter here. You're all doing these same tasks. So when I look at how lean our office is, we're efficient, and my staff works incredibly hard. They don't leave at 3:45 like they're supposed to. They're always there because they work to the job. But I'm worried about burnout right now for everybody.
In these types of asks, we coming out of this spring and summer, had a board report regarding HR, which showed that our staff is doing an excellent job, and did have some recommendations. And I guess my question is, do we have any consulting support for someone with deep, like we had with providing the report, deep experience to consult with us in continuing to move forward on the steps we're taking to continue to improve our HR systems? Is that something that's under
So we've
consideration?
actually, this year, through Boces, COSER, we've actually, because the consultant that the board employed to perform the audit is not available, doesn't have the time because he is very busy in other districts at this time. Through conversation with him, he actually recommended using the previous consultant the district had employed, Lenora Buller. So we are going to be using Lenora to partner with the team to support our efforts operationally, as well as from a learning standpoint. So we've actually been working to find some funds to have Lenora come in for a handful of days this spring and work with us, and then looking to carrying that forward as well.
Okay,
And
good.
And I've maintained that same level of funding that we put in last year
Mhm.
for those things this year, whether it
You
be
did,
through
okay.
BOCES. I may still have it in the contractual line and not in the BOCES line, but so those might be a transfer, but I have still maintained that level of funding to keep that going. Knowing that we don't have a full HR department, that is something that we felt was important.
Very good.
So you just said to find the funding for this.
It's whether we have it in the BOCES or the other contractual. We do
Oh,
have-
because we put aside
We
about
did.
25 last year
Yeah.
for that purpose for this year.
Most of it was used for the audit, actually.
So we have to
Oh, I
find a
thought
little
for
bit more.
this year going forward, we
Right.
added more. No?
Well, we're gonna start it sooner, but we used it already for the consultants, so now we have to just find a little more to continue this year to start implementing it, but.
Okay.
But to my ear, that sounds like great steps, so. good to-
Yeah, and someone that knows the district well, and not only do we have relationships with her and trust her knowledge and experience, but the auditor recommended her as well, so that should add another layer of confidence for the board.
And I'll just make one other note, there's a lot of things we can maybe do more efficiently. Have we time to really figure out how to do it? So like, things with, there's systems you can put in place, but you need time to be able to get that going. And that's one of those things when you're filing a report or doing this and doing that and reacting to all those things we're doing. That's where I think if we could get the clerical stuff taken care of, we might be able to do some more of that and then ultimately save some money in the future. There's, we do benefits by hand. We're enrolling people by hand. There's systems out there for this. There's a lot of technology we're just not using. Now, they might cost too much for us, but those things I want to explore. I definitely would like to look at that. And maybe in the future, I could be showing you a savings here.
Mhm.
Just don't know that yet.
And just my last question, it was also around the computer infrastructure. I know we started the one-to-one in the middle school this year, but, and then in the spring and summer, there are complaints about the ability to access Wi-Fi and its reliability, and then I guess in the fall, there was work to improve that. Do we have any sense of where we stand with our ability for devices to connect to Wi-Fi?
So I would need Jay to really answer that, so I'll take that question back and try to get you an answer.
Okay.
Is he going to be here for the conversation during the budget season with amplifying that? Because I think that's really
Yeah.
going to come into play. There are going to be a lot more
Good.
questions.
So
on
that's a
that.
preview of a
Yeah.
question we have.
Yeah, but to that point, I can say that they've been doing saturation tests around the campus in particular, but also in the other schools as we've implemented the use of more wireless devices, replacing traditional desktops. And I would say many evenings when we're here late working, you'll see the wiring crews here running lines. They're moving access points and supplementing the existing infrastructure based upon their analysis of where load is or where they get reports of connectivity challenges. So I would say evenings and vacations, we almost have always someone here working on that right now.
Okay, thanks.
Might I ask for a little color on that, since you bring it up? It just made me wonder, what is the reporting process like for the connectivity issues? Is it just via the teachers? Is there like a form they use?
No, it's all an automated help desk system.
Okay.
So everything is tracked and monitored, and one of the ways that we interact and monitor Edutech, who's our IT vendor, that we look at their response time and resolution time on reported problems. So there's a whole logging system where we can see the number of issues that surface, and you see that spike at the beginning of the year when everybody comes in new and everything's been unplugged and plugged back in, or sitting idle for a couple months. But they kind of level out throughout the course of the year and do a pretty good job managing it. And we meet quarterly with Edutech and a leadership team to review their progress and needs and our needs. But that's regularly something that's reviewed. Jay Strumwasser, our Director of Technology, interacts with leadership from Edutech on all those issues on a regular basis.
And just to be clear about the transportation study, as a quad village, are they
Yeah.
also taking part of this study, or is it just us?
So, I mean, we funded it. I don't think the other districts funded it. I've worked with them to try to come up with topics and things, issues that maybe we could all discuss. They didn't fund a transportation study, so I have to make sure that our RFP really reflects what we really want to see as an outcome.
Yeah.
They're going to end up benefiting from that, I would suppose. I mean, some of the topics we're looking at is how we can bring in some more districts to lower our cost, but that ultimately would, again, maybe result in more ride time, so that's something. That's why we're looking at central access points and things.
Or no?
So, yeah, so right now, so you'll read in the state jargon that they've improved the whole, they've solved the piggybacking contract, so now you can have piggybacking on transportation contract. You will read that in all your state things, but it's not true for our contract, because our contract was cooperatively bid, so, within our consortium. So we would have to reopen our contract in order to allow that piggybacking to specifically happen. It's a legal glitch that, because we've had one district interested in joining the cooperative and piggybacking, and we can't. So whether we want.
Which contract?
That's the out-of-district contract. So we would have to open that up, which we don't really want to open that contract up right now, because it's quite favorable to us at this point in terms of that. We just did that one. So there's issues with this. So like the state fixed it, but they didn't fix it. They fixed it in theory. So there's lots of little legal pieces that have to go with it. So we're trying to decide right now whether we do want to still reopen that contract and have it rebid, so that we can then change the language, so that we can then bring these other districts in. So we're working through some of these issues right now, and Joe Urbanowitz is kind of follow up on a lot of those things that we talked about. And then I would bring the consultant in to talk more about central points, the load, the mileage, is all those other pieces that could affect us. Again, keeping in mind that you have to get 3 other districts to agree to something, so it's a little bit tricky, because you're not just affecting us. If we, agree on central points, would it only be central Irving points in Irvington? Maybe, but, would it be central points everywhere? So there's a lot to consider here, and I will do a full analysis on this as soon as I free up a little time to get there.
And I guess since we're talking about that study, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I think there are a number of trustees who are interested in the question of school start time, and I know a number of us are attending an event next week about it. So this study doesn't have a start time component. So that, I guess I just want to float that out there, that might be a part of our conversation during this budget season, if there was board interest in studying that question more specifically.
I feel like that question for us to study for this budget cycle, it just seems a little late, don't you? I don't know.
Well, it would
I'm talking about you put money in this budget for next.
To do the study.
So that
Do the
more.
study.
Oh, my
Right on in the
apologies, I
future.
misunderstood you.
I actually took the consultant study money out, so you saw a decrease in that line, but if we can work it in, we'll try to add that back in, I guess, but.
Well, I mean, we should all discuss it, but I feel like that's an interest. I mean, my colleagues can say, no, we're not interested. but-
Whatever the transportation study looks like, can that be one of the things that this
Potentially.
person looks at in terms of our use of buses, and if we were to change start
I wrote
time,
it down.
how that would be impacted? It would seem like they're coming in analyzing stuff that might be something that we could get as part of this analysis.
But they're doing out-of-district
Right,
analysis.
But
we may be able
potentially-
to,
But we can
Add
see if
on.
we could fold in a component
Yeah.
of it.
You guys can add alternate and see what it costs.
yeah.
Have that mindset.
Can we look at work start times also? All right.
4-day weeks?
Yeah, well, I mean,
What do you want our
Just
start time to
joking.
be?
joking.
7 a.m.
Yeah, I was gonna say we all start at 6 a.m.
Yeah, 5:30, or whatever. Count.
They're events of the morning people.
5:30, but who's counting?
So I'm looking at the notes, and I had a question about the the election management system
Okay.
that was coming in, and I have to apologize for not having done more research, but life sometimes intervenes. Could you tell us a little bit about what it does do and what it doesn't do? Because right now, it seems like anything electronic related to voting is under greater scrutiny. So could we understand what help is needed and what the benefits are, and also whether this has any sort of connectivity to the internet.
So actually what Bold does is many districts use this. I would say, I don't know, Pauline, you probably know this, maybe half of New York State already is, if not more, is using this. And they create the voter registration books for you. So they're not just a book, they're also online. So you can, I don't know if they're online, but they create a database for us. So if you come to that voter time and that they can quickly find you, sometimes someone can't find a name, they can do it. It puts us in the 21st century with the voter books. They do the work of all that for you, so there's a lot less risk we have in terms of maintaining our voter books. It also produces statistics for you in terms of how many people have voted in that hour, because it's just constantly doing some of that. Am I getting this pretty much right? Because it's online, it's a computer and you're signing in with a laptop, we need a couple laptops for election. The whole process for voting is supposed to be faster, and we need fewer inspectors. So this will be our trial year. We think we can do it within.
There's good alignment between staff and laptops?
What? Well, we can use laptops that we have existing. I'm not going to buy laptops for this, but.
I'm just talking about the
Yeah,
staffing.
I understand your point.
Yeah, so.
I think Mr. Hannah's point was to make sure that
We have the right staff that can do this, yeah.
yes, staff
So
has the
if
skill.
many districts are doing this, I think we can be able to figure out how to do it here in Irvington and hope for the best in this one. We did run this one by Elaine because, this is one of those ones where we don't want to just change everything that she's been doing. And she totally endorsed this product, so she's heard about it before. I think she just was a little afraid to ask for the money. But the way we looked at it, we think we can afford it within what we're already doing. And then I'll get 8 next year. That will help me get funded for the following year. So it's kind of a thing.
But I'm kind of missing,
I think it's.
besides going into the 21st century, why are we looking, I always think there are systems that need to be improved. I get that. I'm just kind of wondering, why this?
I.e., we all miss the old voting booths.
We also have a duty to maintain all of these records, so I think making this electronic will make that a lot easier as well. Pauline, is there anything else you want to add on this one, because you've met with them?
And I know that's always been a challenge, finding people the day of.
So just because we're not on the mic, we're hearing that staffing would be reduced.
Yeah, staffing will be reduced, and this year we may even have some trouble, because with all the primaries and all the voting and early voting going on, our actual risk this year is whether or not we even get machines, but, we don't know.
All I know is that we're in good shape when we have those kinds of problems. Talking about administrative voting.
I'd say let's do this test. We'll keep an open mind this year, and then we'll be able to report back on how this worked.
Well, everyone
I've
has to
only-
make assumes that there
I've
will
only
be
heard-
glitches the first year.
I've only heard good things from every other district that does this, how they basically help people.
And may I just clarify too, is what you're doing in maintaining these voting books essentially replicative of any kind of local function doing the same thing? I mean, how, is it like a school district, just to clarify maybe for any audience that might hear this piece?
Why don't you come to the mic?
Oh, yeah.
You can.
This will be my first year doing the books, so, but we get the books from the district, these are very good books, they're gonna,
From the county.
from the county, I'm sorry, and then they'll be, school district specific, and they'll maintain the records for us, it'll be all nice printout, everything will be electronic. In the back, we've got stacks and stacks of old county election books, signatures that don't match sometimes, it'll just keep it all streamlined for us.
Thank you for clarifying. So in a way, what we're doing is here internally is kind of replicative. So this is getting rid of that replication.
Yeah, the representative also told us that if somebody registers, it actually, there's no lag by the time when they register to when we actually come to vote. So there's less time than they spend at a table looking up and trying to register. It's like a fast track kind of process. So there's a lot that they do. I believe they're going to be with us that first day, so they're going to really help us through this first year and manage this transition. I feel positive about it because I've heard from other business officials how wonderful this is.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Hope it's true.
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else?
Calendar discussion.
Thank you.
We're down on the calendar.
All right, load that up. This one is much briefer than the last, and only being a few slides. But this time every year, we always discuss the proposed calendar for the upcoming school year. We always step back and make sure that we're always trying to maximize learning experiences, and so that's considering when we start the school year, the actual start days, thinking about the number of days we can actually get in earlier in the year, when we have consideration for our students, especially in the secondary environment that are taking competitive tests, when students across the country start earlier, often in August, so they have additional days of instruction before tests such as AP exams are actually taken. We have to hit SED requirements of 180 days. I have to tell you the calculation for school calendar are incredible these days. There's these massive complex spreadsheets that we maintain that literally calculate minutes by school, by grade level, for every single day of the school year to make sure we hit all of the SED requirements. We also have to make sure that we plan our schedule so as not to interfere with the state testing calendar. We have contractual obligations that we have to consider, such as certain employee groups that need to have certain holidays off. So that builds into it. We try to, where possible, have some alignment with Boces and some of the surrounding districts for efficiency, so we don't have disruptions in our students here in Irvington having vacation when we have children that are attending Boces programs, so their neighbors are following similar schedules, so there's lots of alignment there. And we always have to allot for snow days or emergency closures. That said, an overview of this year's calendar. As we know, Labor Day falls the latest it possibly can, being the 7th. And I've sent out a number of communications to the school community on this, because this year we're actually looking to have our students start after Labor Day, which is traditional, but rarely as late as it is. If we look at the calendar, we could have in fact had our students return to school before Labor Day and had 2 to 3 instructional days in before the holiday weekend. But based upon the fact that we're having construction this summer and the magnitude of the work that's going to be ongoing, it was a request of our construction managers and our architects to try to maximize the summer break for this work. And they literally asked for any extra day or hour that we could give them. So by starting after Labor Day, enables them to continue to progress in the projects. We will, however, have our faculty and staff, as you can see towards the bottom of the slide, return the week before Labor Day for our traditional 2 superintendent's conference days that will occur before school starts. Generally and historically, at least since I've been here, we've always held them in August, which again allows us to maximize opportunities for learning, but we're bumping them back to the 2nd and 3rd for this purpose. When looking at the calendar, we always have to work towards rating day, which is the date that State Education Department identifies as essentially the last day of the school year. That is June 25th for this coming year. We're looking at our December break, dates that are listed. We're pleased to be able to maintain the February recess. Had we not been able to bring our staff back in that first week of September, we would have had to run the risk of cutting some of those days from February break. You can see where spring break falls, a Memorial Day, a long Memorial Day weekend, and the last student day being the 24th. We've built in our 4 superintendent's conference days, and again, the 4 superintendent's conference days, if necessary, and again, we can all knock on wood, it looks like we're not going to need emergency closure days this year, but they can count towards days of instruction, so those are kind of our slush days. That was my snow pun. But anyways, so we have scheduled them for those days in September. November 3rd, we're starting it this year, but we had that foresight thinking about the national presidential election that will be coming up. So our schools will be closed to students. So there's our mind to safety and security with Dow's Lane being a polling site. So we will have a superintendent's conference day on election day and then another conference day in spring in March. We will maintain our professional learning release days. We've made some modifications based upon the calendar and how they shake out and kind of pattern them similar to this year, and looking at the modifications that were consistent to last year as well. So a little small, hard to look at, but you can see an overview of the calendar, which is representative of what we spoke about before. Again, it's following a similar pattern to this year. We're pleased that we're able to maintain all the vacation periods that we've had in the past. I'll note that we do have 3 early release days in June. Where we had extensive conversation about that last year, where there was a request for 4, and we settled at 3 and maintained that for this year as well. If you look at the pattern of where superintendent's conference days shake out, when we started with PLRDs going back 2 years ago, the initial proposal, which was supported by the Board of Education, was that we were going to look to maintain them on the first and third Wednesday, October through May. But then it just became tight, even around vacations and coming off vacations, going into holidays and having those days squeezed in there. And it was actually one of our community members that had suggested, well, why don't you make it a little lighter and push a day into September? We made that modification this year. And as we look to space them out this year, it actually worked better by trying to do that, because when we take a look at November, it would be really, really difficult to think that we're going to try to squeeze another early release day into that month that already has a number of disruptions. And then when we look at the months of April and May, because of where the vacation period falls in April, March into April, and what the state testing calendar is, we didn't want to have PLRDs when we had testing periods going on. So we could have got into trying to fluctuate to different days. It would just be too difficult to communicate and to track. So we've mapped them out throughout the course of the school year. At the bottom, as I always do, and we note the pattern of makeup days. If we are to exceed the 4 allotted snow days, the pattern by which we would look to make up days. And as you can see that stated, we would begin with April 5th, which would be the Monday following Easter, and then following that, May 28th, which would be the Friday before Memorial Day. And then if we had to go beyond that, if we had more than 6 days, we would go back and look at spring break and start chip away from the beginning of that particular week. So that said, certainly opportunity for discussion and questions, and as always, I come to the table ambitious, looking to adopt it as soon as we can. Know that throughout the course of the year, we get tons of outreach, as Pauline can attest to, or if you talk to Donna in my office, folks calling, asking when's the calendar going to be approved, when's going to be approved, so they can make vacation plans. And I shared with board leadership, I think 2 weeks ago, that we actually had a couple phone calls or emails 3 weeks ago, people already trying to get our wondering and our best guesses for what the calendar for the following year would look like, 21, 22, because people are looking to make plans, whether timeshares or rental properties. So they're already planning 18 months out. So that said, certainly interested for any questions or comments.
So I have a question. I totally understand why the Monday after Easter is here and the Friday before Memorial Day. That's kind of like something new over the past couple of years. Prior to that, how was the calendar created that it had snow days embedded in it?
It was done in similar fashion, but if we exceeded the 4 days that were built in, if we exceeded those days, we would have had to jump right into modifying breaks. So I think back to, I think it may have been my first year, so 8 years ago, Hurricane Sandy, and excuse me, that we had to modify vacation periods or recess periods because of that. We also, in 2 years, had to go to our bargaining units and get them to agree to have an instructional day on rating day. Historically, it would be past practice that they would not have students on that given day. So that would have to be discussion and negotiation and likely a side letter with our bargaining units.
popular question I get asked is what happens when we don't use our snow days? But essentially, we have 184 days, and those 4 days are part of that, and so they count as instruction.
Count as instructional days. It gives us a cushion, so we look really great that we have far more instructional minutes than state ed requires. My response, which isn't a popular one with some of my colleagues here in the district, when asked, and it's already happened a few times this year, as you can imagine, if we don't use our snow days, might you extend some of our breaks? I look at it as an opportunity for more teaching and learning. So there's years where we have many disruptions, but there's also opportunities, and if we're going to build extra days into the school year, let's do it in the heart of the school year when everybody's focused and not wrapped around other vacations. So there's years where you can enjoy that day to go skiing, sleigh riding, whatever you do, where you come to school and learn a little bit more.
Yeah. And I agree with you. There's been a lot of years where we've had a lot of disruptions, so
Yeah.
where we lose those days.
And I'm getting better sleep because of the limited disruptions this year.
So, last year, we had some struggle with the calendar, and we came to a resolution where we had a framework for a professional development plan leading into this year. So, it's now, I reflected on the update we got the other day for the professional development plan. We got to do something with the way to communicate to the community, because if they don't at least know what this plan looks like going forward, here I am again, literally 1 year later. I know we're working on it, but I still don't have a professional development plan in front of me to look at to say, hey, this is what's happening during PLRD, and I cannot go back to constituents another year. So, I'm here again, despite whether it's a popular statement or not. Quite frankly, it's irrelevant to me. But again, 1 year later, still no plan, same asks for PLRD.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful. The word was kept last year that we were going to have a framework, and we did. And I'm hopeful at the end of this year, 2 years later, we have, and I'm sure that promise will be kept as well. But I just want to make sure that we put it on the table.
So I would just, I certainly hear you, David, and I would want to say two things. One, that we have a PD plan, but not in the framework to which we agreed last year.
Right.
And as a goal that was established by the Board of Education, the PD plan, the deliverable was for June of this year.
And I'm hopeful that will come.
And as was discussed in the curriculum committee, and you saw the evidence.
I did.
We have
15,
16 pages of that plan written already, and Mary has already, only been on her own leading her office for a couple weeks.
Within 6 months of her arrival, we'll have a professional development plan as opposed to the 2 years we've been waiting for, right? So I'm urging, the point I'm making here is
There's no need to urge.
I'm urging that we try to be more efficient with these kinds of projects over time. It shouldn't be a 2-year project to do a PD plan. That's really what I've sort of, want to make sure that we just solidify.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add on the PLRD part, though, that to a certain extent, I was recently at the Welcoming Communities, is that what our program is called?
Schools.
Welcoming Schools presentation, and there we got to learn a little bit about how some of the teachers are using the PLRDs within that context. So to a certain extent, and I agree with David about the plan that we have coming up in June, but also I just wanted to ask, I have the sense that when the PLRDs are used for a particular kind of training, it's reflected in the building newsletters generally from time to time, because I think that helps a little bit with community.
There's some reference there. I certainly, and I think I wrote about it in a district newsletter in the last few weeks as well. There's certainly times when there's reference to it, but we certainly don't report on it every given time that one occurs. Nor do I necessarily know that do I agree that it's necessary to report on it every time?
No, I just wanted to know if, from time to.
Yeah, but from time to time, there certainly are references. I can think of some high school references to it.
No, it was
Joyce Road at
interesting. I
Main
think
Street
people
when I
were
did last.
happy to hear that when we were at MSS, and I think it makes the parents.
It really does. I mean, the amount of, more than anything else do I hear from people.
When they, that amount of reflection of what's going on is at least a drop in it. And then the other thing I wanted to add, speaking about community, I know that we got a letter before this meeting from a community member about Memorial Day weekend.
And in the letter, she talks about weeks. There was a time when sometimes we've had 5-day weekends. I know that this year is 4 days, and I think that's been a practice for some time. I wanted to know if you could add to any of the things that I had learned. I went to one of the, or I was sent the minutes from one of the Memorial Day committee meetings that she referenced in that letter. And I would like to say, just so that people can hear it here, since we've all gotten that letter, that it appears that Joe Archino, who's the head of that committee and is also the head of our recreation department, has been able to speak very productively with members of our music department, also people in our high school, in the history department, administrators, and also of the National Honor Society. And it appears that one of the things that with this 4-day weekend, which I think that some members of the community do like to have, is that we will probably have more participation of students at Memorial Day. So I hope, we'll make time to report back on that after Memorial Day in a group, and we can see how it goes, and then people will be more comfortable with the 4-day weekend and see that even with that 4-day weekend, we can have a really good observance of that important day by members of our school community.
Yeah, but you don't find a much bigger fan and supporter of Joe Archino than me. He's an amazing partner for the school district. And in some of the introductions he had with Juliet when she arrived, that was one of the things that we placed on the agenda. So we actually backed in and started some planning opportunities. And, year one, we're not going to be able to deliver large-scale enhancements, but there's going to be lots of layers of student involvement in the weekend and leading up to it. So I think it's going to become a greater opportunity for the school district's presence.
But I think for 2020, we're going to see a big improvement from 2019.
I absolutely think there's going to be improvement there. And to the community members' point, if it's a shorter weekend, it's less likely for people to go out of town as a community as a whole. But when I look at the calendar, there's a little give and take sometimes because we need to have those days that we can utilize as makeup days should we exceed our allotted 4 snow days. So it becomes a discussion of whether we want to look at putting, say, winter recess or spring break at risk right away. It's hard to be able to plan to say that we're going to use a February-based break as a makeup day when the bulk of the winter is yet to arrive.
Yeah.
So we have to make them up somewhere, but I appreciate, Beth, you making that point about the
I feel that perhaps with all this advanced planning, even if people do take that Friday, they'll come back on Monday to observe the holiday. So we'll see.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
You're on that committee?
I am referenced, I'm CC'd on it,
Oh.
and I was asked to be on it, but I have not been able to attend any meetings.
Are we voting yes?
All right.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
The PLRD scheduled on January 20th, since it falls within the same week as MLK Day, do we want to move it to the 27th based on the community feedback last year about having PLRD days in the same weeks as vacation days? I know it's gonna run right up against the 2-3 day. It's gonna run up right against the 2-3 day back to back, but
Yeah, we looked at a variety of different options.
it's impossible to move
And
it.
so when you look at this calendar, you see on the top version 4.1. So I created 4 different models, and this is the 0.1 iteration, and there was a 0.2 and a 0.3, as you can imagine.
That's it?
So we looked at a variety of different scenarios, and no matter where we moved things, it ran into another challenge.
Okay.
So when we looked at that, just as David mentioned, we'd be back-to-back with the 3rd. And we'd also be getting away from it being on the first or third Wednesday, which helps people plan.
There's no way to make it perfect.
All right, wonderful.
Well, I
Good,
appreciate
so-
the work. I'm ready to vote whenever everyone else is.
Good. We'll look to Ms. Davies add it to the agenda on the 3rd.
Thank you.
Quickest
I
one
can
ever.
cheer now.
Yes, and now we have our first read on the 4,000 policy series.
I think we have a few
I think we had just a few
questions.
Oh, yeah, I
questions.
definitely had a question.
Yes?
Yes.
Where'd it go? Oh, I had it up. Hold on, there it is. Okay. So I just wanted to, it was less a question and more just seeking some clarity than anything else, and sort of just to discuss it as a bigger picture item. Understanding that one of my colleagues reminded me that policy is broad, and where it goes into classrooms and buildings, does it get more specific, right? And how it's executed, right? So in the grading systems component in 4710 specifically, I'm just going to read a portion of it. The district believes in the value of grading systems being communicated to students and their parents. To this end, each school and/or teacher shall endeavor to provide appropriate guidance related to class course grading structures or systems. Classroom teachers shall evaluate students and assign grades according to the established system. Grading shall be based upon student improvement, achievement, and participation in classroom discussions and activities. Parents, guardians shall be provided a report card at least 4 times a year regarding their child's progress at the secondary level and 3 times a year at the elementary level. The use of marks and symbols will be appropriately explained. So I just wanted to sort of less question and just sort of as a board sort of just talk about what established systems means at each grade level, and sort of hear from you guys about like normed grading policy across buildings, across grades, just because I've now seen 2 kids go through school, and I'm not really sure, like, just from my own perspective, I don't really talk about this much with people, so I can only use that. I have no idea, how teachers come to grades, no clue. And then in the cases where I ask questions, I find it to be in one class it's one way, in another class it's another way. Whatever it is, I'm not judging it in any way. I just would love it if we could sort of define it in a certain way, so that this term established system has some substance behind it, right? Because the words established system are broad, right? And now I need to go target it into each building. And, it would be nice if there was some sort of like overarching grading policy, like Dow's Lane, this is the grading policy, whether you're in kindergarten, first, second, or third, like the report card is, right? Mm-hmm. The report card is standardized, but then when you dig into how they come to those 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, or whatever, the 90, 80, whatever it might be, it's like, well, one person values homework a little bit more than classwork, and, which is where I come from professionally, it's usually very systemic in a building, right? Like, this is the grading policy, and we've come to it as a team, and however it gets decided on, whatever that, process is. So when we talk about in the policy broadly, what, according to that established system, and then maybe, a way for that established system to be communicated very clearly to parents in some way or other, as a result of the broad policy. That's really, I just wanted to surface that as conversation.
And I think it's something that points to broader conversation. So I can think during my time here, I think the board knows that, we've revised the whole elementary grading process. There's a brochure and a pamphlet that explains the grading process, but what you're speaking to is the individual differences that happen among teachers in classrooms. So it's something to revisit. I don't want to give you an answer, and that may not be 100% accurate at the moment.
Well, it wasn't meant to be. It was just
But
meant
it's
to
something
surface.
to
That's
ponder,
all.
right?
Yeah, no, it was just meant to surface as the first read. That's it.
Anyone else?
I'll put mine up here. But if anybody else wants to go before me.
I think you may be the only one who.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I'll just say, I was at policy, so I know that we've reached back to trustees who had questions about some things.
The problem I'm getting is getting a different email thread than the one I have. Okay, I think I found it. And we don't have the actual printed out
Do you want to see?
policies, do we?
I have
I have
it
it
on
on
my,
my
you can use my
computer.
laptop. Here, it's right here, you can scroll through it.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, so I guess you had this discussion in policy, but I had a question around the policy regarding teaching about controversial issues. And so a question I had raised was around a statement here in which, oh, thank you. My question is, in which it was discussed that, or written that the instruction should, I'm looking for the exact term, but essentially reflect community values. Here it is. Controversial issues may arise that deal with matters about which there are varied levels of opposing views, biases, emotions, and/or conflict. The board wishes to ensure that controversial issues are presented in a manner that preserves the academic integrity of the district and reflects community values. Therefore, the board establishes the following guidelines. So I just, for me, I don't know how we peg what the meaning of community values is, but I guess perhaps, Mary, you might have a response to that?
At this point, I would tell you I don't have a response.
Oh, okay.
It's something I can certainly look into.
Yeah.
Chris, I don't know if you're in a.
Well, I would say the conversation that we had was that looking at the numbered items that fall below that to kind of give you some framework for what those considerations would be. But the belief of the committee was that that language is there to be deliberately broad, to be able to provide that latitude and not back us into a defined set, sit here and negotiate what the values are for every member of our school community. And I would say, Maria, when we discussed this in policy, we really had some spirited conversation.
We did.
In and around it, and felt that when you looking at that, you take those things into consideration, and that you're thinking about what those teachers considering what the values are in this community, and recognizing values shift from time to time. So you want to be able to give folks give folks that latitude, but also to give some level of framework, and that idea of making sure there's educational value, that it's relevant to curriculum, that there's that level of age and developmental appropriateness that comes into play, and those other components. But we felt that it was meant to be deliberately broad and not back us into something to say that we only teach this, because we'd be looking at a small group of people that would be actually defining what our values are and what we would and would not address as to be considered a controversial topic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have an undefined term in our policy is what I'm saying. It means nothing. So we're saying somebody looks at this and says, this is or isn't a community value, we have no basis whatsoever to have that discussion, because we're not pegging it to anything.
I would say, and certainly I respect your opinions, Michael. I don't know that that it changes the meaning of the policy, even if we were to you drop a period after the word district and strike the rest of that sentence.
I would agree with you.
I don't think it changes the meaning of the policy.
And I think the 3 points below really do guide.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's extraneous, and I'd suggest we just cut it, because I think if it's ever a debated topic, if we have one of those events that have occurred in prior years around freedom of expression or, class, having choice in class, that would be more guided by what's here versus someone talking about whether it's a community value or not. So I would suggest we just cut it and use what you pointed to, which I think is more valid within our educational community for reference.
I mean, the same thing, in the second bullet, in the second point, when presenting various positions on a controversial issue, again, that's very vague too, because what you might consider controversial, I might not. So, I hear what you're saying. It's not like I care one way or another if it's cut.
Why don't we have policy take this back and
The
look
group
at the
felt,
suggestion?
we've already discussed it. The group discussed it, and
we were also concerned about community values, but we discussed it with members of the administration and of the board. We felt that I'm trying to recollect how we came out about it, but we talked about the fact that it's not just about something of academic interest, and that the community itself,
Defined as.
the Irvington Union Free School District community, I mean, that would, I wasn't that concerned about it, but I do get your point now.
I just think, if it ever becomes that we're talking about this, it will just be a point in which we circle around endlessly, potentially, and that's the only point. I agree that at the end of the day, if you don't want to do anything about it, I'm not going to, make a big deal, but I think it's not a worthwhile term to have in the policy.
Oh, so, okay.
So why don't we move on since,
And we can rediscuss.
Yeah, could you open that up? It closed.
Oh, it closed, sorry.
Yeah, such a great resource.
I didn't realize. I believe you had 4821?
So 4821, there's a portion related to teaching religious music.
Yeah, Mary?
I'm sorry.
And Mary, you had some.
In the policy around 4821, teaching religious music, there was a piece of,
So the standards, the New York State standards in music call for a wide variety of repertoire. They don't specifically call for religious music. If you think about, traditionally when you're looking at choral music, you're looking at orchestral music. So much of it in certain eras does come from a religious background. That's where the money was to pay the musicians to develop the music. NISMA has come out with a policy statement about the use of religious music in instruction, and their statement, which I shared with Chris and he can forward to you, states that you really need to be looking at the value of it as a piece of music, as representative of a particular style, of a particular era, and you're not teaching it because of the religious content of it.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to add to that I would hope to the degree that that's occurring, that it represents a range, a variety of, it's not just, like you talk about a period, but the world has had various religious music related to the various traditions for a long amount of time, so I wouldn't think it would just be, Christian choral music of Europe of a particular time. Hopefully it would be.
That's part of the canon of that group. There's others as well. So the standards are looking to expose children both in listening and in performance to a wide variety, representing many cultures, many periods, many eras, many styles.
So while it's not reflected in our policy,
It's reflected in the state standards.
Okay, great. And then the one other question I had is just around the use of animals. And I had a conversation with Maria. I just wanted to confirm if someone doesn't want to dissect an animal, do we offer in our district the ability to use replicas?
I know that some of the science classes have simulations. I can confirm that that is always an option.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And I would say, we do find that opportunity for kids to participate in simulations, and I recall when we had our conversations related to Amplify, that was one of the benefits of Amplify, that there was that digital opportunity for kids to participate in a simulated experience or a recorded experience.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great.
so let's move on to the consent agenda. Any questions on the consent agenda? So can we get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
As we now no longer have any community members here, we will skip our next community comments. Our next meeting is our special meeting, Tuesday, February 25th at 7 p.m. here. And now, if I can have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to the employment of particular persons and collective bargaining.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.